Tonight, you turned off the lights in your room. The world outside went quiet. And in that silence, you felt it again. That dull, heavy ache sitting right in the center of your chest. You didn't do anything wrong, you know that. But somehow you're the one lying here in the dark, alone with the pain. And the people who hurt you, they're probably sleeping just fine. You've been asking yourself the same question for days now. Maybe weeks. Maybe longer than you'd like to admit. Why does this keep happening to me? Why is it always the people who care the most who end up hurting the most? Why do good people finish last in a world that was supposed to reward kindness? That question isn't weakness. That question is one of the oldest, most deeply human questions ever asked. And today, you're going to get a real answer. Not a motivational poster, not empty words. The actual psychological and philosophical truth behind why this happens, and what it means for who you are. Let's start with something you were never told. From the time you were small, you absorbed a belief. It wasn't written down anywhere. Nobody sat you down and said it directly. But the world taught it to you through stories, through the adults around you, through every fairy tale and every lesson that ended with the good person winning. The belief was this: if you treat people well, the world will treat you well in return. Psychologists call this the illusion of moral reciprocity. It's the deep, almost instinctive assumption that kindness creates kindness, that fairness invites fairness, that the goodness you put into the world comes back to you. Researcher Melvin Lerner spent decades studying this. He called it the just world hypothesis, the belief that people get what they deserve. His research, published in the 1960s and expanded throughout his career, showed that this belief is almost universal. Humans need to believe the world is fair. It makes life feel predictable, safe, manageable. But here's what Lerner also discovered. That belief is a psychological comfort, not a fact. The world is not a mirror. It does not reflect your goodness back at you with perfect accuracy. And the stronger your belief in that fairness, the more devastating it feels when reality breaks that illusion apart. So the first truth is this: you were not naive. You were human. Every person on earth carries some version of that belief. You just lived it more honestly than most. Now here is where it gets deeper. Why are some people kinder than others in the first place? Where does genuine empathy come from? Why do certain people feel another person's pain almost as if it were their own, while others move through the world seemingly untouched by the suffering around them? Neuroscientist Decety at the University of Chicago has spent years scanning human brains to answer exactly that question. What his research consistently shows is that deep empathy, the real kind, the kind that makes you lose sleep over someone else's problems, the kind that makes you give when you have nothing left to give, is not a personality trait that people are simply born with. It is something that gets built, and it gets built through pain. The people who feel the most are almost always the people who have been through the most. Your sensitivity is not a flaw that appeared randomly. It was forged. Every time you were let down, every time someone you trusted turned away, every time you sat exactly where you're sitting now, in the dark, alone with your thoughts, something was being constructed inside you. A depth of understanding that most people will never have. An ability to see another person's suffering and actually feel it, not just observe it from a comfortable distance. Carl Jung, one of the most important psychologists in history, described this kind of person as the wounded healer. His idea was simple and profound. The people who carry the deepest wounds often become the most capable of healing others, not despite what they went through, because of it. Think about that for a moment. The very experiences that are breaking your heart right now are the same experiences that make you extraordinary. The reason you don't abandon people is because you know what abandonment feels like. The reason you don't lie to the people you love is because you know what it feels like to have the ground disappear beneath you when someone you trusted wasn't telling the truth. The reason you stay and try and give, even when every rational part of your brain tells you to protect yourself, is because somewhere inside you, you made a quiet decision a long time ago. You decided you would never make someone else feel the way you once felt. That decision is not weakness. That is one of the rarest forms of moral courage that exists. But here is the part that nobody warns you about. That same openness, that same depth of care, that same willingness to love without armor, it makes you visible to a very specific kind of person. And not in a good way. Research by psychologist Simon Baron-Cohen at Cambridge University examined what he called the empathy spectrum. On one end are people with extremely high empathy. On the other end are people with almost none. Individuals who process other people primarily as objects, as tools, as means to an end. Baron-Cohen found that people at opposite ends of this spectrum are drawn into each other's orbits with an almost gravitational pull. The person with no empathy is searching for something, and what they find in you, your warmth, your willingness to forgive, your instinct to see the best in people, looks from where they're standing like an unlocked door. Your kindness is not a flaw, but it is a signal, and some people are very good at reading that signal. This is not your fault. Say that again. This is not your fault. A lion in the wild does not stop hunting because the animal it's chasing is gentle. The lion has its own hunger, its own needs, and your gentleness is not relevant to that calculation. The people who used your trust, who leaned on your patience, who took everything you offered and then walked away, they were never responding to you. They were responding to what they needed, and what you needed never entered into it. Understanding that is not the same as excusing it. What they did was wrong, but placing the blame on your own goodness is perhaps the most dangerous mistake you can make right now, because it leads to a conclusion that would cost you everything. It whispers that maybe you should stop being who you are. Maybe you should close off, harden, become someone who doesn't care so much. Do not listen to that whisper. Buddhist philosophy has a metaphor that has survived thousands of years for a reason. The lotus flower. It grows in the darkest, most contaminated water. It does not grow in clean, still, perfect ponds. It roots itself in mud, in decay, in the kind of environment that seems completely incompatible with something beautiful. And then it rises, slowly, through all of it. And when it finally breaks the surface and opens, there is not a single trace of the mud on its petals. Your pain is the mud. Every betrayal, every disappointment, every night exactly like this one. That is the mud. And you are not the mud. You are what grows through it. Here is the counterintuitive truth that psychology keeps arriving at from different directions. Researcher Brené Brown at the University of Houston spent years studying vulnerability, courage, and human connection. What her data showed repeatedly was that the people who were willing to stay open, who continued to love and trust even after being hurt, were not the weakest people in the room. They were the bravest. Because they understood something that defended, closed-off people never learn. You cannot selectively numb. When you build walls to keep the pain out, you also lock the joy in. You cannot protect yourself from hurt without also blocking out everything that makes life worth living. The people who hurt you were counting on something. They were counting on the pain being enough to change you. They were counting on you becoming smaller, quieter, more like them. A world that cannot produce goodness in you has won. A world that turns your caring into cynicism has succeeded in its worst work. But if you can rise from this exact moment, if you can feel every bit of what you're feeling right now, let the tears come, sit with the darkness, and still choose to remain who you are, that is not just survival. That is a form of victory that the people who hurt you will never be capable of achieving because they never had the depth required to understand what they were up against. The darkest sky shows the brightest stars. You already know this. You felt it before, in smaller moments, when everything went quiet and you looked up and saw more than you expected to see. This is that moment. Bigger, harder, more real, and more important. You didn't do anything wrong. Your conscience is clean. And that clean conscience, that unshakable knowledge that you acted with love, with honesty, with everything you had, cannot be bought, cannot be faked, cannot be manufactured by someone who has never been willing to feel what you feel. So tonight, in this room, in this darkness, let yourself rest. Not because the pain is gone, but because you are still here, still whole beneath the weight of it, still you, and the fact that you are still you, after everything, is the most remarkable thing about you. Tonight, you turned off the lights, and in the silence, instead of running from what you felt, you finally understood it. That ache in your chest is not a sign that you lost. It is proof that you were willing to love fully, in a world that doesn't always deserve it. That is not a curse. That is the rarest gift a human being can carry.